Hi, this is Father Bonaventure Chapman. I'm a Dominican priest of the province of St. Joseph and a professor of philosophy at the Catholic University of America. In this series, we've been talking about how to extend the plan of life from the 90 days of Exodus past those 90 days. We're looking at 4 different aspects: the natural level, the intellectual level, the spiritual level, and the communal level. In this talk, we'll be looking at that third level, the spiritual level. In each one of these talks, I've been putting out a principle, a picture, a patron, and a practice to make these more clear and concrete. The principle for the spiritual level is raising our minds to God. In the last 2 talks, the natural and the intellectual, we've focused on rightly ordering ourselves and then knowing in order to love. But unfortunately, even if we have rightly ordered ourselves and if we're knowing in order to love, it's not yet determined what we will love. At the end of the day, there are really 2 objects of our love that are possible: God or ourselves. And even if we've been thinking correctly, it still is not the case that we automatically find ourselves falling in love with our Creator. Rather, we need to make acts of love and acts of knowledge for Him. We need to see our life as not just materially ordered, and not just intellectually ordered, but rather spiritually ordered. That this world is, in a sense, only part of the real world. And we need to remind ourselves of the truths of our faith so that we might be directed to God through all the things around us that we see. The picture for this particular pillar, the focus on the spiritual life and seeing beyond what we actually see, is the kid who's obsessed with dinosaurs. The kid who had the dino cups, the dino sheets, the dino toys, everything dino. Knew all about dinosaurs. Now, he did other things too. Of course, he played sports, he went to school, he ate dinner, he did his chores, all of these things. But if you caught him and asked him about dinosaurs, he would tell you way too much that you wanted to know. And it's the thing that he was thinking about in the quiet moments. It's, in a sense, as if he lived in Dino Land, a magical place that he saw and no one else did. That's a great picture for what St. Paul talks about of always being attentive to Christ and being conformed to the mind of Christ. That we see this world as a spiritual world, and that we see things beyond what other people would normally notice. But rather we're directed to God's providences and God's life and God's actions in our own lives attentively. That we make intentional acts of faith, and that we aim to live in this particular world, in a sense, a little obsessed about Him. The patron for this principle is St. Dominic, the founder of the Dominican order, who is said to always talk cum Deo vel de Deo, with God or about God. Now, of course, Dominic ate, Dominic slept, Dominic walked all over Europe. He did lots of things. But all of his activities were at some point directed to God. He was consciously either praying or talking or conversing with God, or talking to people about God or leading them to God in some way. This wasn't a heavy-handed gesture, but a deep sense that God was what really mattered to him, such that even when he was at his night vigils, giving up some sleep and staying in the church, talking to God, when he got tired, he rested his head on the altar and on the tabernacle so that he could, even in sleep, be close to God. He had a sort of obsession, but in a good sense. St. Dominic founded the order of friars preachers, the Dominicans, to fight off a heresy, the Albigensians, or the Albigensian heresy, that thought the body was a bad thing, that thought that the created world was a bad thing. And Dominic said, no, God created the world good, and gave us the things in the world to draw us to Him, to see past the visible world to the invisible. And we Catholics think this is extremely important. It's the whole point of the sacraments, that we're given these signs for these sacred realities. And Outside of the sacraments, we have the sacramentals. So the practice here to raise our minds to God in all things is to put Him in front of our minds. To have small holy cards around as bookmarks, have them on desks, have crosses in your homes, on the desk, on a table, around you. Have rosaries in your pocket, not always praying, but there. Being surrounded by spiritual things so that we're always easily raising our minds to God. The point of the spiritual life is to see that this life of nature is drawn up into a life of grace, and that our life of virtue and knowing and loving is aimed at knowing and loving ultimately Him. And having sacramentals and these visible signs are assistances for those of us who live in the world of sense, that we might make sense of it from the spiritual realities in knowing and loving God Himself. If you're looking to develop in prayer and have a roadmap for the spiritual life, download the Exodus 90 app today.